The morning sun painted golden streaks across the Los Angeles sky as Dr. Maya Richardson pulled up to the private aviation terminal at LAX. Her sleek black Tesla came to a smooth stop in the designated parking area, the clock on her dashboard showing 6:45 a.m. After a week of performing complex brain surgeries at different hospitals across the country, she was more than ready to head back home. Maya checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting her neat black blazer and making sure her braids were properly secured in a professional bun. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of being one of the top neurosurgeons in the country. Her deep brown eyes held warmth, but also the determination that had helped her overcome countless obstacles throughout her career. Taking her designer carry-on from the trunk, Maya walked toward the terminal entrance. Her heels clicked against the pavement, matching her steady heartbeat. The morning air felt crisp against her skin, carrying the distinct mixture of jet fuel and ocean breeze that was unique to LAX. Several private jets stood waiting on the tarmac, their metal surfaces gleaming in the early light. This wasn't her first time using the private terminal. The hospital frequently arranged private flights for their top surgeons, especially when they needed to reach multiple cities quickly for critical operations. Maya had saved 4 lives this week alone, including a particularly challenging surgery in Boston that other doctors had deemed impossible. As she approached the security checkpoint, Maya reached into her bag for her documentation. Everything was perfectly organized, just as she kept her operating room. Her hospital ID, pilot clearance, flight authorization papers, and government identification were all neatly arranged in a leather folder. She had double-checked everything the night before, a habit ingrained from years of medical practice where attention to detail meant the difference between life and death. A few other travelers milled around the terminal, business executives in expensive suits, a famous actor Maya recognized from television, and what looked like a family heading toward their private plane. The atmosphere in the private terminal was usually calm and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos of the main airport terminals. "Good morning," Maya said with a warm smile as she reached the security desk. She noticed the guard's name tag read Thomas Weber. His face remained impassive as she slid her documentation folder across the counter. "I'm Dr. Richardson. I have a 7:30 flight arranged by Central Hospital." Weber barely glanced at her credentials before his expression changed. Maya noticed it immediately, that subtle shift she had seen countless times before. His eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw tightened, and his posture became more rigid. She felt her stomach tighten, recognizing these as warning signs of what might come next. The security guard picked up her hospital ID with 2 fingers, as if touching something distasteful. "This terminal is for authorized personnel only," he said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there when he greeted the businessman just moments before. Maya maintained her professional composure, something she had mastered over years of facing similar situations. "Yes, I understand. You'll find all my authorization papers are in order. The flight has been arranged by Central Hospital's administrative office. You can call them to verify." She watched as Weber shuffled through her papers with unnecessary force, his frown deepening with each document. The other travelers at nearby counters were being processed quickly and efficiently, but Weber seemed determined to scrutinize every letter on every page of her documentation. Maya glanced at her watch, 7:00 a.m. The pilot would be expecting her soon for the pre-flight briefing. She had never been late for anything in her professional life, and she didn't intend to start now. Still, she could feel the situation shifting from a routine security check into something else entirely, something far too familiar yet no less frustrating. Little did Maya know, this ordinary morning was about to turn into an extraordinary story that would change not just her life, the lives of many others. The next few minutes would test her patience, challenge her dignity, and ultimately reveal the power of truth over prejudice. Security guard Weber handed Maya's documents back with a sneer. "These could be fake," he said loudly, making sure others could hear him. "We get people trying to sneak in here all the time." His eyes traveled from her face to her expensive blazer, then to her designer shoes, as if trying to find proof that she didn't belong. Maya took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "Sir, I assure you these documents are real. I'm Dr. Maya Richardson, Chief of Neurosurgery at Central Hospital. You can verify this with a simple phone call." She pulled out her phone, ready to provide contact numbers, but Weber held up his hand to stop her. "Anyone can print fancy papers and buy nice clothes," he said, his voice getting louder. How do I know you didn't steal that identity? The real Dr. Richardson could be someone else entirely. He emphasized the word real in a way that made his meaning clear. He couldn't believe a black woman could hold such a position. The temperature in the terminal seemed to drop several degrees. Other travelers began to slow down, watching the scene unfold. Maya noticed a young Asian woman in a pilot's uniform taking out her phone, but she kept her focus on Weber. "Mr. Weber," Maya said calmly, though her heart was racing, "I've flown through this terminal 12 times in the past year alone. You can check the security logs. You can call the hospital. You can even look up my surgical schedule from this past week. Boston on Monday, Chicago on Wednesday, Seattle yesterday." She pulled up her hospital's website on her phone, where her profile was featured on the main page. Weber barely glanced at the phone. Instead, he pressed a button on his desk. "I'm calling my supervisor," he announced. "Meanwhile, step aside. You're holding up the line." He gestured toward a bench near the wall, treating her like a suspected criminal rather than a distinguished surgeon. Maya stood her ground. "No, I will not step aside. I have a flight to catch and patients who need me. Your behavior is completely unprofessional and discriminatory." Her voice remained level, but carried the authority of someone used to commanding operating rooms. 2 more security guards approached, responding to Weber's call. Maya noticed they both had their hands on their weapons, though she had shown no aggression. The sight made her stomach turn, but she refused to show fear. "This woman," Weber said to his colleagues, emphasizing woman with doubt, "claims to be some hotshot doctor. Says she has a private flight, but her papers look suspicious to me." He turned to Maya with a smirk. "Real doctors don't usually travel alone. Where's the rest of your team?" Maya felt her face grow hot, but years of performing surgery under pressure had taught her to stay cool. "I travel alone because I'm the surgeon they fly in for cases other doctors can't handle. Last week, I removed a brain tumor that 3 other surgeons said was impossible to reach. The week before that, I repaired a spinal cord injury that would have left a child paralyzed." The growing crowd of onlookers began to whisper. Maya could see phones being raised, recording the incident. A well-dressed businessman who had passed through security earlier stepped forward, frowning at the scene. Weber's supervisor finally arrived, a tall woman with graying hair named Patricia Mills. She glanced at Maya, then at the documents Weber thrust toward her. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked, her tone suggesting she had already sided with her employee. "The problem," Maya said, her professional tone carrying across the now quiet terminal, "is that your security guard is refusing to accept my valid credentials because of what he sees when he looks at me. I've been flying through this terminal for years. I'm listed on your approved pilot's manifest, and most importantly, I have patients waiting for me." As she spoke these words, Maya noticed movement in the crowd. A young girl with a distinctive scar along her hairline was tugging at her mother's sleeve, pointing excitedly in Maya's direction. The girl's face was familiar, and Maya felt a glimmer of hope. Sometimes she knew the truth had a way of revealing itself at exactly the right moment. The young girl broke free from her mother's grasp and rushed forward, her blonde hair bouncing with each step. "Dr. Richardson! Dr. Richardson!" she called out excitedly. "Mom, Dad, look. It's her. It's the doctor who saved my life." The security guards tensed, but Maya's face lit up with recognition. "Emma Thompson," she said warmly, remembering the challenging surgery from 8 months ago. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Emma's parents hurried forward, their faces showing both surprise and joy. Mr. Thompson spoke first, his voice carrying across the terminal. "Dr. Richardson, what's going on here?" His eyes moved from the security guards to Weber, who was now shifting uncomfortably. Mrs. Thompson placed her hands protectively on Emma's shoulders. "This is ridiculous. Do you people have any idea who she is? Dr. Richardson performed a miracle surgery on our daughter when every other surgeon said it was hopeless." Emma touched the scar on her hairline proudly. "I had a really bad tumor," she announced to the growing crowd. "All the other doctors said it was too dangerous to remove, but Dr. Richardson figured out how to do it. She even let me pick out my favorite music to play in the operating room." Sarah Chen, the young Asian pilot who had been recording everything, stepped forward. "I'm uploading this to social media right now. The aviation community needs to see how one of the country's top surgeons is being treated." Her fingers moved quickly over her phone screen. The terminal manager, Patricia Mills, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Weber, perhaps we should double-check those credentials again." But before Weber could respond, more voices joined the conversation. A businessman in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd. "Dr. Richardson, Maya Richardson from Central Hospital." He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a surgical scar. "You operated on my brain aneurysm last year. I was back in the boardroom within 3 weeks." The crowd began to murmur more loudly. Phones appeared everywhere, recording the scene. Someone in the back shouted, "I saw her on the cover of Medical Innovation Monthly." Another voice added, "My sister's a nurse at Central. Dr. Richardson is a legend there." Weber's face had turned an alarming shade of red. He fumbled with Maya's documents, nearly dropping them. The 2 security guards who had approached earlier now took small steps backward, trying to distance themselves from the situation. Maya maintained her professional composure, though her heart swelled with emotion. She checked her watch again. 7:15 a.m. Ms. Mills, she said calmly, "I understand you need to follow security protocols, but I have a flight waiting, and more importantly, I have patients who need me. Shall we resolve this?" Sarah Chen's video was already gaining traction online. She held up her phone, showing the rapidly increasing view count. The hospital's social media team just responded. They're confirming Dr. Richardson's identity and schedule. Emma tugged at Maya's sleeve. "Show them the special card you gave me, the one with your picture on it." The girl dug into her small backpack and pulled out a laminated card, a special badge Maya gave to her young patients, featuring her photo and credentials. Patricia Mills finally took charge of the situation. "Mr. Weber, step aside. Dr. Richardson, please accept our deepest apologies. Let me escort you to your flight personally." She glared at Weber, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. But Maya wasn't finished. She looked at Weber, who couldn't meet her eyes. "Mr. Weber," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I would like to speak with you for a moment." The crowd fell silent, wondering what she would say to the man who had just humiliated her. Maya Richardson had faced discrimination many times throughout her career. Each time, she had 2 choices: let anger take over, or turn the moment into something meaningful. As she stood there, surrounded by supporters and witnesses, she knew exactly which path to take. What happened next would not only change Weber's life forever, but would also become a powerful lesson in dignity, forgiveness, and the importance of confronting prejudice with wisdom rather than wrath. Maya took a step closer to Weber, who seemed to be trying to make himself as small as possible behind his security desk. The crowd held their breath, phone still recording, waiting to see what would happen next. Even little Emma stopped fidgeting, sensing the importance of the moment. "Mr. Weber," Maya began, her voice gentle but firm, "I want to tell you about a patient I had last month." She paused, making sure she had his full attention. "A man came into the emergency room with a severe brain injury. When I walked into his room, this family immediately asked for another doctor." Weber's eyes flickered up to meet hers for the first time since the confrontation began. Maya continued, "They didn't want me to operate because they didn't believe someone like me could be qualified enough. They didn't trust me because of how I look." The terminal was completely silent now. Sarah Chen's phone kept recording, capturing every word. Mrs. Thompson held Emma closer, while the businessman with the surgical scar nodded slowly, understanding where the story was going. "Do you know what I did, Mr. Weber?" Maya asked, maintaining eye contact with the guard. "I didn't get angry. I didn't walk away. Instead, I spent an hour showing them my credentials, explaining the procedure, and answering all their questions. By the end of that conversation, they weren't seeing my skin color anymore. They were seeing my experience, my knowledge, and my commitment to saving lives." Weber's face had lost its hostile expression, replaced by something that looked like shame. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo, placing it on the security desk. "This is that patient today, fully recovered, back at work, playing with his grandchildren. He sends me Christmas cards now." She spread her credentials out on the desk again, but this time differently. "These papers you thought were fake. Each one represents years of study, countless sleepless nights, and hundreds of lives saved. This hospital ID means I've earned the trust of one of the best medical institutions in the country. This pilot clearance means I'm trusted to fly across the nation to help people who need my skills." Patricia Mills, The terminal manager stepped forward to intervene, but Maya held up her hand politely. Please, let me finish. She turned back to Weber. Every time someone like you doubts me because of how I look, I have two choices. I can let anger win, or I can turn it into a teaching moment. Weber's voice came out barely above a whisper. Dr. Richardson, I'm not finished, Maya said firmly. Today, you saw a black woman in expensive clothes and assumed I didn't belong here. But what you should have seen was a doctor who just spent the last week saving lives in 3 different cities. What you should have seen was a professional who has earned every single credential in front of you. Emma suddenly spoke up from the crowd. She's the best doctor ever. She made me feel brave when I was really scared. Her innocent comment brought tears to several observers' eyes. Maya smiled at Emma before turning back to Weber. I could demand your job right now. Based on the number of phones recording this incident, I probably wouldn't have much trouble making that happen. Weber flinched, but Maya's next words surprised everyone. Instead, I want to invite you to spend a day with me at the hospital. Come see what I do. Meet my patients. Understand why I fly across the country at a moment's notice. Maybe then you'll learn to look beyond your prejudices and see people for who they really are. The crowd burst into applause. Sarah Chen wiped tears from her eyes while still recording. Patricia Mills looked both relieved and impressed. But Maya wasn't done yet. She had one more thing to say, something that would transform this moment of conflict into an opportunity for lasting change. Sarah Chen's video had already gone viral. As Maya stood in the terminal, her phone began buzzing nonstop with notifications. The CEO of the private aviation company, James Morrison, was calling. News reporters were sending messages, but most importantly, other doctors and medical professionals of color were sharing their own similar experiences. Dr. Richardson, Patricia Mills said, looking at her own phone, Mr. Morrison is on his way here personally. He's asking if you can wait a few minutes. The terminal manager's hands were shaking slightly as she read the message. Maya checked her watch again. 7:25 a.m. Her flight could wait a few more minutes. This moment was too important to rush. She noticed Weber still standing awkwardly at his desk, looking like he wanted to disappear. Emma's father stepped forward. I want to share something, he said, his voice carrying across the terminal. When we first met Dr. Richardson, I had doubts too. He looked ashamed to admit it, but she saved our daughter's life when no one else could. She didn't just treat Emma's tumor. She treated our whole family with kindness and respect. Other voices began joining in. The businessman with the brain aneurysm scar spoke up. After my surgery, Dr. Richardson personally called my wife every day for a week to check on my recovery. She even helped explain medical leave papers to my company. A flight attendant pushed through the crowd. I remember you from last month's Chicago flight. You talked to me about my mother's medical condition and recommended a specialist. She's doing so much better now, thanks to your advice. Sarah Chen lowered her phone and addressed the crowd. The video has over 100,000 views already. Medical associations are sharing it. People are calling for changes in security training. Dr. Richardson, you've started something big here. Maya raised her hand, asking for quiet. This isn't just about me, she said clearly. This is about every professional who has faced discrimination. Every doctor, pilot, lawyer, or executive who has been judged by their appearance rather than their abilities. The terminal's automatic doors swooshed open and James Morrison hurried in. The CEO was still adjusting his tie, having obviously rushed over. He headed straight for Maya, hand extended. Dr. Richardson, I cannot apologize enough, he began, but Maya gently interrupted him. Mr. Morrison, instead of just apologizing, let's make real changes. Her voice was strong and clear. I have a proposal for you. Work with me to create a new training program. Not just for your security staff, but for all aviation personnel. Let's turn this incident into something positive. Morrison nodded eagerly. Anything you suggest, Doctor, we can start immediately. Weber, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. His voice was quiet but sincere. Dr. Richardson, could I be part of that training? To share my story? To help others learn from my mistake? The crowd hushed, waiting for Maya's response. She studied Weber's face carefully, seeing genuine regret in his eyes. This was the moment that would define not just her response to discrimination, but how others would handle similar situations in the future. "Yes, Mr. Weber," she said with a warm smile. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Real change happens when people admit their mistakes and work to do better." Emma tugged at Maya's sleeve again. "Does this mean you're going to teach people to be nice to each other?" she asked innocently. Maya knelt down to Emma's level. "That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes the best way to fight meanness is with kindness and education." As if on cue, Maya's phone buzzed again. This time it was Central Hospital's chief of staff, asking her to lead a nationwide initiative on medical workplace discrimination. The incident that started as a simple security check was transforming into something much bigger, a movement that would change countless lives. But first, Maya had one more surprise for everyone in the terminal. What she said next would ensure that this moment would be remembered not just as a viral video, but as the beginning of real, lasting change. Maya straightened up from talking to Emma and addressed the crowd with renewed purpose. "I want to make an announcement," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet terminal. "Starting today, I'm establishing the Richardson Foundation for Equal Access in Medicine and Aviation." James Morrison, the aviation company CEO, stepped forward immediately. "Dr. Richardson, our company would be honored to be your first donor. What happened here today shouldn't happen to anyone, ever again." The businessman with the aneurysm scar raised his hand. "Count my company in as well. We can provide corporate backing and business connections." Others in the crowd began nodding and offering their support too. Sarah Chen, still holding her phone, spoke up excitedly. "Dr. Richardson, your story is trending nationwide now. Major news networks are asking for interviews. Medical schools want you to speak to their students. This is getting huge." Maya held up her hand for quiet again. "The foundation will have 3 main goals," she explained, speaking clearly so everyone could understand. "First, we'll provide scholarships to minority students in medicine and aviation. Second, we'll create training programs to fight discrimination in these fields. And third, we'll offer legal support to professionals who face similar situations." Weber, who had been listening intently, stepped out from behind his security desk. His face showed both shame and determination. "Dr. Richardson," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I want to be your first case study. Let me share my story, how my prejudice almost stopped one of the country's best surgeons from reaching her patients. Maybe it will help others recognize their own bias." Patricia Mills quickly joined in. "The airport authority will fully support this initiative. We can start implementing new training procedures immediately." She looked at Weber. "Starting with our security team." Emma's parents exchanged a look before Mr. Thompson spoke up. "We run a media company. Let us help tell your story, Dr. Richardson. Not just what happened here today, but your whole journey, from medical school to becoming a top surgeon. People need to hear this." Maya smiled warmly at their offers of help. This was exactly what she had hoped for. People coming together to create real change. She checked her watch one last time, 7:40 a.m. Her pilot had been notified of the delay and understood the importance of what was happening. "There's one more thing," Maya said, turning to Weber. "Mr. Weber, you're not fired." Weber looked up in surprise. "Instead, after you complete your sensitivity training, I want you to become part of our foundation's education team. Your transformation can be a powerful teaching tool." The crowd murmured in approval. This was more than just forgiveness. It was turning a negative experience into a positive force for change. James Morrison stepped forward again. "Dr. Richardson, we'd like to make this terminal a training center for the foundation. Every employee will go through your program, and we'll extend it to other airports nationwide." Sarah Chen suddenly gasped, looking at her phone. "Dr. Richardson, Central Hospital just announced they're matching any donations to your foundation, dollar for dollar. And 5 other major hospitals have already joined in." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes, but she held them back. This was becoming something bigger than she had ever imagined. A simple morning of discrimination was transforming into a movement that could help thousands of people. Emma tugged at Maya's sleeve one more time. "Dr. Richardson," she said with a child's innocent wisdom, "you fixed my brain, and now you're fixing people's hearts too." Maya knelt down and hugged Emma tightly. The young girl's words had captured the essence of what was happening perfectly. Sometimes the most painful experiences could lead to the most powerful healing, not just for one person, but for an entire community. As Maya finally prepared to board her flight, she knew this was just the beginning. The Richardson Foundation would become a beacon of hope and change, starting right here in this terminal where she had faced discrimination just an hour ago. But there was still more to come. Changes that would ripple out far beyond this single morning at LAX. 3 months after the incident at LAX, Maya stood at a podium in the same terminal where everything had started. The space had been transformed. New training rooms lined the walls, and a large sign read Richardson Foundation Center for Professional Excellence. More than 200 people filled the terminal, including reporters from major news networks. When I walked into this terminal that morning, Maya began her speech. I never imagined it would lead to all of this. She gestured at the crowd, which included medical students, aviation professionals, and supporters from across the country. In the front row sat Emma Thompson and her family, beaming with pride. Next to them was Sarah Chen, who had become the Foundation's media director after her video of the incident went viral. The video had now been viewed over 10 million times and was being used in training programs nationwide. In just 3 months, Maya continued, the Richardson Foundation has accomplished more than we dreamed possible. She began listing the achievements, counting them off on her fingers. 20 minority students have received full medical school scholarships. 15 airports have adopted our training program, and most importantly, we've created a support network for professionals facing discrimination. Thomas Weber sat in the second row, looking very different from the angry security guard he had been 3 months ago. After completing extensive sensitivity training, he had become one of the Foundation's most effective speakers. His honest talks about recognizing and overcoming his own prejudices had touched thousands of people. Mr. Weber, Maya said, gesturing for him to join her at the podium, would you like to share your story? The crowd applauded as Weber walked up, no longer hanging his head in shame, but standing tall with purpose. 3 months ago, I was the problem, Weber began, his voice clear and confident. Today, I'm part of the solution. Dr. Richardson didn't just forgive me, she showed me how to become a better person and help others do the same. James Morrison, the aviation company CEO, stepped up next. Our company has transformed, he announced proudly. Since implementing the Richardson Foundation training, complaints about discrimination have dropped by 90%. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. Other airports are calling us every day, wanting to know our secret. The changes hadn't stopped at the aviation industry. Central Hospital had created a new position for Maya, Chief of Diversity and Medical Excellence. In this role, she split her time between performing surgeries and leading initiatives to make healthcare more inclusive. Emma raised her hand from the front row. Dr. Richardson, can I tell them about the kids program? Maya smiled and nodded. Emma stood up, her surgical scar now barely visible beneath her hair. We started a club at my school, Emma announced proudly. We learn about different kinds of doctors and pilots and other cool jobs. Dr. Richardson says we can be anything we want to be, no matter what we look like. The crowd clapped enthusiastically. The children's program had been Emma's idea, and it was already spreading to schools across the country. Young students were learning early lessons about respect, acceptance, and judging people by their abilities rather than their appearance. Sarah Chen stood up next, holding her phone. We just got amazing news, she announced excitedly. The governor wants to make our training program mandatory for all state facilities. And 3 more major hospitals have joined our network. Maya felt tears of joy forming in her eyes as she looked around the terminal. The same space where she had faced discrimination had become a center for positive change. Security guards now greeted everyone with respect. Signs on the walls promoted equality and professionalism. Even the architecture had been modified to feel more welcoming. But the most significant change was in the stories they kept hearing. Stories of people standing up against discrimination, of professionals feeling more confident in their workplaces, of barriers being broken down one conversation at a time. As Maya prepared to cut the ribbon for the new training center, she knew this was still just the beginning. The ripple effects of that one morning were still spreading, touching more lives every day, and the best part was yet to come. A special announcement that would take the Foundation's mission to an entirely new level. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, Maya walked into the LAX private terminal again. This time, something remarkable happened. Every security guard, including Thomas Weber, stood at attention and smiled warmly. A large portrait of Maya hung on the wall beside photographs of other pioneering professionals who had broken barriers in their fields. "Good morning, Dr. Richardson," Weber said proudly, wearing his new uniform with the Richardson Foundation pin. "The students are waiting for you in the main training room." His transformation over the past year had been remarkable. He was now the head instructor for the Foundation's security training program. Maya nodded and smiled, remembering how different things had been exactly 1 year ago. The terminal had become unrecognizable. Where there had once been cold, unwelcoming security checkpoints, there were now open spaces with signs reading "Welcome all professionals" in multiple languages. Inside the main training room, 30 young faces looked up eagerly. These were the first graduates of the Richardson Foundation's scholarship program, future doctors, pilots, and aviation professionals from diverse backgrounds. Emma Thompson, now 13, sat in the front row. She had become the Foundation's youth ambassador, speaking at schools across the country. 1 year ago, Maya began, looking at the eager faces before her. "I stood in this terminal facing discrimination. Today, we're celebrating not just change in one place, but a nationwide transformation." She picked up a remote and turned on the large screen behind her. Live video feeds appeared from 20 different airports across the country. Each one had a Richardson Foundation training center. More than 5,000 professionals had completed the program, and the results were clear. Discrimination complaints had dropped dramatically throughout the aviation and medical industries. Sarah Chen, who had filmed the original viral video, stepped forward with exciting news. "Dr. Richardson, we just received word from the White House. They want to make our training program a national standard for all transportation hubs and hospitals." The room erupted in applause, but Maya had an even bigger announcement to make. She gestured to James Morrison, the aviation company CEO, who had supported her from the beginning. Together, they unveiled a new sign: the Richardson Institute for Professional Equality. "This terminal was once a place of division," Maya announced. "Now it will become a full university campus, training the next generation of professionals in both their chosen fields and in human dignity." The scholarship students gasped in excitement. They would be the first class of this groundbreaking new institution. Weber stood up to share his part of the story. "When Dr. Richardson offered me a chance to learn from my mistakes, I didn't know it would change my whole life," he said emotionally. "Now I teach others how to recognize and overcome their prejudices. We've helped more than 10,000 people change their perspectives." Emma raised her hand. "Tell them about the international program," she said excitedly. Maya smiled. Emma never could keep a secret. The screen behind them switched to show connections with airports and hospitals in other countries, all asking to implement the Richardson Foundation's programs. "But the most important change," Maya said softly, "isn't in the numbers or programs. It's in the daily stories we hear." She played a video montage: a black female pilot being respectfully greeted at airports nationwide, a Hispanic doctor receiving congratulations on her new position, an Asian medical student giving a speech at her graduation. As Maya concluded her speech, she noticed something remarkable. In the back of the room stood some familiar faces, the same crowd that had witnessed the incident 1 year ago. They had returned to see how their support that day had helped create lasting change. "What started as one difficult morning has become a movement," Maya said, her voice full of emotion. "But we're not finished yet. This is just the beginning of a new chapter." She looked at the young faces before her, the future leaders who would carry this mission forward. The Richardson Institute would go on to train thousands of professionals, breaking down barriers and changing lives. But more importantly, it stood as a powerful reminder that the best response to discrimination wasn't anger or revenge. It was education, understanding, and the courage to transform negative experiences into positive change. Maya's story had become more than just a viral video or a foundation. It had become a blueprint for turning confrontation into conversation, prejudice into progress, and moments of pain into lifetimes of purpose.